Shalom. This video is about Parashat Vayakhel. It's the second to the last portion in the book of Exodus. It's often read in conjunction with Pekudei, which is the last portion in Exodus. The year I'm recording this, 2008, is a leap year, and so they read them separately. Vayakhel has many important things. There's two particularly that I wanted to mention. The first is, if you look at Exodus chapter 35, you'll notice at the beginning it talks about the various kinds of milacha, work, that you're not permitted to do on the Shabbat. But it doesn't define what kind of milacha it is. It's pretty important to know what God doesn't want us to do on the Sabbath. Now, immediately adjacent to that passage, right below, is a long description of the kind of milacha they did in constructing the tabernacle. So the rabbis, in their exegetical principles of logical deduction, which they basically borrowed from the Greeks, they established a logical principle that if you have two adjoining texts, and in one text a term is used that's defined, in an adjacent text the same term is used but not defined, it is logical to deduce that the word that is used in the passage where it's not defined has the same meaning as the passage in which the word is defined. So in this case you have the word milacha used in both the first and second sections, the one on the Sabbath and the one on the construction of the tabernacle. And since we are told in constructing the tabernacle these are the milachot that they did, the rabbis deduced from that those are the things that are forbidden on the Sabbath. In fact, there's a very famous former University of Chicago religion professor named Mircea Eliade who said that the ancient temples reflected one's view of the cosmos. And in that conception, it makes perfect sense that when God created the world, God said that these are the kind of activities that are considered to be creative. And in terms of constructing the tabernacle, these are the same kind of words and works that are considered to be part of the fabric of constructing the miniature world, as Mircea Eliade would say, our own view of the cosmos. Now, there's a very interesting book called The Sabbath, not by Heschel. That's a very fascinating book, too, about Shabbat as holy time. But this particular book by Grunfeld talks about the various forms of melachot, and the kinds of work that are forbidden on the Sabbath, where they come from, and the concept of creative work. Now, the Mishnah, which is the first part of the Talmud, details the 39 forms of labor that are prohibited on the Sabbath, deduced from this chapter. And so we have the basic rules of what's forbidden on the Sabbath to help us enforce actually menucha, rest, on Shabbat, by this passage, very important passage in the Shabbat rules. So in the Ten Commandments, as it's written in Deuteronomy, where it says, Shamor et ha-Shabbat, guard the Sabbath, guard the rest, this is what is done. Now, in terms of Jewish law, you can watch my other videos on Shabbat, but basically, there are things that are called milachot. Those are primarily things that are forbidden. And there are a few that are mentioned specifically, like lighting a fire, and then in the prophets it says don't carry on Shabbat, but the rest are all deduced from this passage. And the Talmud and the subsequent codes then details basically what Jews do and don't do. And there are some differences. The conservative rabbis have some leniencies that the Orthodox don't. For example, we believe that it's permitted to drive to the synagogue on the Sabbath, but everyone prohibits, conservative and Orthodox, the use of money, going shopping, cooking from scratch, although you can heat up food that's already been cooked, not by turning a fire, but by having the fire on a low flame or using electrical heat that's already on. The conservative movement allows the use of lights. Orthodox do not. That has to do with different interpretations of what fire actually is. But anyway, the basic point is that chapter is very important, both spiritually and philosophically, about the nature of the relationship between Shabbat and the cosmos and the construction of the tabernacle, and on the issue of rest itself. Now, the second main thing it talks about is a building campaign, which we discussed in last week's Torah portion, Ki Tisa. But this says that people were asked whose heart was willing. It wasn't a tax, like the half shekel was in Ki Tisa. This was whose heart was willing, bring gifts to help construct the tabernacle. And what's fascinating about that, Torah says that they gave so much that Moses had to finally say, as my mother would say in Yiddish, genug, enough. We have enough, more than we need. And that just shows you the incredible generosity of the Jewish people. Now, not all Jews are tzedakah-minded, charity-minded. But the Jewish people on the whole are amazingly charity-minded. First of all, the Jewish charities in this country, even though Jews represent 2% of the population, like the Federation Joint Campaign, is, I think, the second or third biggest charity in the whole country. And then in terms of the secular charities, like the cities run, Jews are amazingly generous to those. And so this completely anti-Semitic idea that Jews aren't a generous people is just ridiculous. And it starts in the Torah saying the Jews gave so much to build the tabernacle that they had to stop giving. And if you look in every major city of who supports the symphonies and the art institutes and the main civic organizations, Jews are way, way, way overrepresented in their generosity of spirit. And it goes back to this Torah portion. So Parashat Vayakhel has both of these great stories. Now, one more thing. Vayakhel, the root, is congregate. In the noun form, it's a congregation. We say in Hebrew, a congregation, a synagogue is really Kehilah Kedosha, a holy congregation. And so Vayakhel, Moses assembled the people, as a verb. But last week we had the same verb in chapter 32 in a negative way, that the people congregated against Aaron and forced him to build his golden calf. So congregations can be, and congregants, and the act of congregating can both be positive and can be dangerous. You know, unruly mobs, for example, as they did in Aaron's case, but here it's assembled for noble purposes. And one of the things that we cherish about America, of course, is that our right to assemble, because countries that are brutal dictatorships don't allow the people free speech or the right of assembly. So the name itself has deep spiritual significance. Hope you enjoy, as always, to be spiritually enriched by the beauties of Parashat Vayakhel.